Okay, so you sent over a whole bunch of stuff on this Trump idea for Gaza.
Yeah,
Articles and clips and even some deep dives into the history.
right.
Seems like you're really trying to get a handle on what this plan actually ice
Mm-hmm.
and what people are saying about it,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even how we got here in the first place.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, well, maybe we should start with what the proposal actually is.
Okay, yeah,
So Trump's suggesting that the United States should just take over the Gaza Strip,
that's right.
but the how is a little unclear.
Yeah, he's talked about like purchasing Gaza
No.
or even just taking it.
Wow.
And those early reports sort of hinted at this plan to relocate everyone living there
Right.
to other countries.
That's almost 2 million people,
Yeah, something like that.
maybe with financial help from like wealthy Arab states.
Right, exactly.
That definitely raised some eyebrows.
Finally.
But then we heard from people like Marco Rubio and Caroline Levitt
Uh-huh.
saying any relocation would just be temporary,
Yeah.
just to allow for rebuilding.
Right, almost like hitting the pause button on life in Gaza while they revamp the whole place.
And what is Trump's vision for this new Gaza?
Well, he talks about tourism and real estate.
Wow.
Like a total transformation.
From conflict zone to beachfront property?
Yeah.
That's quite a vision.
Definitely bold.
So what's the reaction been like?
Well, you've got a whole spectrum of opinions on this.
Okay.
Like Netanyahu, for example, didn't exactly jump for joy, but he did call it the first good idea I've heard, which is a pretty interesting thing to say, don't you think?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes there.
Right.
Is he really intrigued, or is that just some calculated political move?
Hard to say for sure,
Right.
but he's definitely got to balance domestic politics and international pressure. A full endorsement of something this radical could create problems on both fronts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Since you've got someone like Sam Newman.
Oh, yeah, the Australian football guy.
Yeah, he came out fully in favor of the plan. Yeah, he even condemned neo-Nazis for supposedly supporting it.
Huh.
I thought that was interesting because it really shows how this issue goes beyond the typical left versus right stuff.
You wouldn't expect someone like him to agree with Trump on something like this.
Exactly.
It's more complicated than that.
Definitely deeper currents at play.
And, of course, then you have the Palestinians themselves,
Right.
including Hamas, who are, I'm assuming, not thrilled about this.
No, they are vehemently opposed to this idea.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, it has huge implications for Palestinian autonomy.
Right.
And what's known as the right of return.
The idea that Palestinian refugees have a right to return to the lands they were displaced from.
Exactly.
So for a lot of Palestinians, this is about more than just the land.
That's right.
It's about identity and history and justice.
Absolutely.
And to really get their perspective, I think we need to look back at the history here.
Yeah, for sure.
Which, as you know, is very complex. And that's where all those historical sources you sent over come in.
Okay.
So we're talking decades of conflict, shifting borders,
Yeah.
multiple players.
It's a lot to unpack.
Let's start after Israel was created in 1948,
Okay.
when Egypt was in control of Gaza.
That was a crucial time.
Okay,
Because that's when you had a big influx of Palestinian refugees settling in Gaza.
interesting.
And a lot of them never got Egyptian citizenship. So it created this kind of legal limbo that still affects things today.
Then in 1967, Israel took control of Gaza during the Six-Day War,
Yes.
which led to the establishment of Israeli settlements
Right.
and growing tensions with the Palestinian residents.
Exactly.
And this occupation lasted for decades,
It did until the Oslo Accords in 1993.
which was an attempt to make peace.
Yes. The Oslo Accords led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority
Okay.
and gave limited self-governance to both Gaza and the West Bank.
It felt like things were moving in the right direction at the time.
Yeah, there was definitely some hope there.
But then Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005,
Right.
dismantled their settlements,
Mm-hmm.
pulled out their troops.
But here's the catch.
What's that?
They kept control over Gaza's borders and airspace
Oh, wow.
and access to the sea.
Really?
And that's been a major source of tension ever since.
I can see how that would cause problems.
Yeah, it contributes to the feeling of confinement in Gaza
Right.
and the economic hardship.
And then, of course, there's the ongoing conflict between
Mhm.
Israel and Hamas,
Yes.
which has caused so much death and destruction.
It's a tragic situation.
So you've got this backdrop of historical trauma and political deadlock and recurring violence,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where Trump's proposal comes in.
It's a very different approach.
It really seems to turn the conventional approach on its head.
Yeah, you could say that.
So what happens next? I mean, what are the potential consequences of this?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
No crystal ball,
All
unfortunately.
right.
The situation's just too complex.
It really is like there are so many factors at play. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded.
Exactly. But I guess we can at least explore some possible scenarios.
Yeah.
Like if the plan were to actually be implemented, successfully.
With everyone on board.
Yeah, with buy-in from all the major players.
Right.
It could lead to, better living conditions for the people in Gaza.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Gaza going from this symbol of conflict to like a thriving tourist destination.
It would be a pretty dramatic shift.
Definitely.
But the obstacles are huge.
Like what?
I mean, just for starters, you're talking about massive investment in infrastructure and job creation and social services.
Okay.
And then there's the whole political and security piece.
Right. Will Hamas just give up control?
Yeah.
Will neighboring countries actually cooperate?
And what about Israel's reaction to a major U.S. presence right there on their border?
Yeah, it's a good point.
Lots of questions.
And not a lot of answers.
And of course, there's always a chance that this could backfire.
Oh, yeah.
Big time.
What do you mean?
I mean, it could inflame tensions even more.
Oh, wow.
Lead to even more instability.
Increased resentment.
Yeah.
A resurgence of violence.
The conflict could spiral out of control.
That's a scary thought.
We also need to think about what this would mean for the peace process.
Oh, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process.
Right. I mean, is this going to just completely derail those efforts?
Or could it somehow be part of a negotiated solution?
Yeah, it's hard to see how this wouldn't complicate things.
Some people say it could create leverage. Force both sides to make concessions.
Yeah.
That they wouldn't otherwise consider.
But others are worried it would just make things worse.
Make a two-state solution even harder to achieve.
Exactly. It's a risky gamble.
Definitely high stakes.
And then there's the international community.
Right.
Will they support this plan?
Or is this going to be seen as the U.S. going rogue?
Yeah. And isolating itself even more.
I wonder what the UN will say.
That'll be interesting.
They've been critical of Israel in the past.
Yeah, so their reaction could tell us a lot about how the rest of the world feels.
Okay, so much uncertainty.
Definitely.
It's almost hard to keep track of it all.
But let's bring it back to you, the listener, for a second.
Okay.
Why should you care about this?
Yeah, why should anyone care about this conflict? Half a world away.
Well, for one thing, this is one of the most complex and persistent geopolitical challenges of our time.
It's been going on for so long.
It has ramifications way beyond the region itself.
Like what?
It impacts global security, humanitarian aid, all sorts of things.
And now you've got the United States, a major world power, potentially getting more directly involved.
Exactly. The stakes are higher than ever.
So what happens in Gaza could affect everyone.
It's also a story about human rights and justice.
Right.
And the search for peace.
Millions of lives are at stake here.
And the decisions made by their leaders and our own leaders will have a huge impact.
It's like a reminder that even in this interconnected world, there are still places where people's basic needs aren't being met.
And where violence is a daily reality.
It's heartbreaking.
We may not have all the answers, but we need to stay informed.
Right.
Engage in thoughtful discussion.
Hold our leaders accountable.
Exactly. We can't just turn away from these issues.
No matter how complicated they are.
Now, stepping back from the immediate reactions and the historical context, there are a couple of broader themes here that I find really interesting.
Oh, I'm curious. What are those? Well, for one thing, Trump's proposal seems to challenge some of the assumptions people have about American power.
Oh, how so?
Well, it suggests a willingness to get involved in a region that's been a diplomatic nightmare for a long time.
Yeah, a place where even the best intentions seem to fail.
It's almost like a throwback to a different time.
When the U.S. felt less constrained.
Less worried about global opinion.
Or the risks of getting stuck in these unsolvable conflicts.
There's a boldness to this approach.
Some might even say recklessness.
That's very different from the more cautious strategies we've seen lately.
It's definitely shaking things up.
And what's the second theme that's caught your eye? It's the role of economics in all of this.
Oh, okay.
Trump's vision for Gaza basically depends on this idea that if you build it, peace and stability will follow.
It's an interesting idea.
Right.
I mean, can you really just buy peace?
With real estate and luxury resorts?
Yeah, I mean, it's like this grand social experiment.
Using economics to try and fix this really deep conflict.
It's definitely a risky experiment.
But there are examples throughout history where economic prosperity has helped reduce tensions.
That's true.
Even between countries that used to be enemies.
But usually those countries have something in common.
Like what?
Shared history, maybe?
Yeah.
Cultural ties, some level of trust already there.
Okay.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is different.
Yeah, decades of animosity and mistrust.
Right, that's not going to just disappear overnight.
Even with a bunch of fancy new buildings.
But maybe a big economic shift could change the conversation.
Like a new starting point.
It's a gamble for sure.
Only time will tell if it works.
It raises a good question, though.
What's that?
What is the relationship between economics and peace?
Can money really buy happiness?
And can prosperity lead to reconciliation?
Or is that just naive?
It's something to think about as we watch this plan play out.
So where does this leave us?
Well,
We've looked at the proposal and the reactions. We've dug into the history,
all right.
considered the possible consequences.
Of good and bad.
What are your final thoughts on all of this?
I think the main thing is that there are no easy answers here.
This isn't a simple problem.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is just so complicated.
It's a tangled mess.
You've got historical grievances and political maneuvering and deep-seated beliefs all mixed together.
It's a lot.
Trump's plan tries to cut through all of that,
With one big move.
but we don't know if it'll work.
Or if it'll just create more problems.
It shows that even in the 21st century,
Right.
with all our technology and global connections,
Some conflicts are just really hard to solve.
but that doesn't mean we should stop trying to find peace.
It just means we need to be humble.
Yeah.
Try to understand each other.
And be willing to compromise.
It's easy to get caught up in the political arguments.
And all the emotional rhetoric.
But at the end of the day, this is about real people.
Real lives.
And the choices made by their leaders
And our leaders, too.
will have a huge impact on everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave you with one final thought.
What's that?
What role should the United States play in all of this?
Should we be involved at all?
And is Trump's plan a step towards peace?
Or a recipe for disaster?
These aren't easy questions.
But they're questions we need to think about.
If we want to see a better future for this region.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And as always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.